so what is then parity in the 1930s, and why is it we bring it up all the time? Why is it necessary? Well, the Parity Group has read books like the following, and I'm just going to put up a few books really quick. And it's Unforgiven by Charles Walters, and Sold for Debt and War, How the American Economic System Sold for Debt and War. And it left in the wake were our 900 farmers per week going out of business. Some of that can happen naturally, and it happened naturally during the period where we had parity for 10 years. But this is an inside documentary on how our system went down and underserved the masses, the many, to protect a few, and going back to the free market system so that the rich could take over with their plutocracy and their abilities. Walters also produced Raw Material Economics. Again, just as everyone has said previously, this is raw materials coming in, getting the credits you needed. And are we doing that? So there's some more explanation. What happened in the U.S., then you have a historian. We have Michael White here. This is his father's co-writing partner. American Farmers, the New Minority. Little sad. But let's not quit there, because we got to ask, why quit our own? This is people suffering. On Friday evening, we heard Eric. You could hear the struggle, the voices of him being an indigenous-like farmer, permaculture, very aware. And he's feeling like we're quitting our own. He doesn't want, he feels like he's hurting and he's shouting out. And will our top-down leaders be listening to Eric? And if not, what can we do to help? So, and this is George Peake, and the Parity Group has been reading this book over the last year, and it's a wonderful, George Peake, remember that name? He comes out of the 20s and 30s. He worked in the Roosevelt administration, and dedicated himself at that time. And one more Peake book here is George N. Peake and the Fight for Farm Parity, a vivid story of the farmers' campaign for agricultural equality. And then we have Carl Wilken, of course, who's a farmer, Iowa. He led 5,000 farmers, and because of that, they had to listen to him in Washington, and as congressman, he got a voice, and he was the central arrowhead, if you will. If the body was made up by the farmers and Kuznets and other thinkers before him, it was Wilkins that drove it home in Washington that we had something we call parity. So how does this work in the United States, considering our Constitution and everything? Well, we have three speakers today that are going to go over these ideas. And first will be Joe Bongiovanni, second will be Sue Peters, and third will be Randy Cook. Great welcome to you all here, and let's get started with Joe.
Unmute, Joe. Let me unmute myself. Stephen, thank you very much both for the introduction, of the vast picture of what it is that we're working with, and also for that little bibliography there of the books that people should be focusing on, I feel, at this time, in order for us to make any kind of real progress socioeconomically, however you want to think about it. Yeah, so I want to start off just a little bit outside the box here, which I usually do, and just to explain to people that, my background, I'm a retired rural electric cooperative general manager. That's what I kind of did for my career, if you will. But however, I started studying about the monetary system about a month after I got out of the Army, my dad had moved to Indiana, and he said, "Come on, stop by. Mom wants to see you. You go, just stop by for a couple few days." I went out there, and when I got there, and he said, "I opened this new factory. I could really need some help, some people that that I can depend upon. So how about if I put you to work? I'll pay you the same thing I'm paying the line crew, the guys that are producing the goods." He said, "And I'll buy you lunch every day." Well, that last part kind of got me. But I didn't know at the time that it was actually, I don't know, the camel's nose under the tent or whatever. Because as soon as I got to the first day when I was working with him and got to lunch, that's the day he started teaching me about the monetary system. It was 1963. He said, "Do you know where money comes from?" I looked at him the same way people look at me when I ask them that question. And while I was still looking at him, he says, "Don't feel bad. 90% of the bankers, 95% of the economists, and 99% of the people in Congress don't know where money comes from either." He said, well, that piqued my interest, and it's been a long and somewhat arduous and sometimes lonely trek to get to my understanding of how the monetary system itself really works. And within that study of the monetary system, my dad never relented. When I moved to Canada in the 70s, he came up there and brought me Frederick Soddy's book on the role of money. And if you haven't read The Role of Money, you need to, because you have to understand the role of money in a economy. So when he gave me that, also at a conversation at dinner, he said, he was telling me about he had gone down to meet with the Congress people, the Joint Economic Committee of the Congress. He was trying to present them with some ideas. And he said, while he was there, he said, I ran into this group that was trying to get something going with something called parity in agriculture. And he said, they really got me. He said, I really didn't understand what they were talking about, to be honest. He said, but I could tell that there was something there, and I could tell that the people in the Congress knew that there was something there because they were dealing with a law. They were dealing with something that the Congress had already passed. That's the key to my discussion today about parity economics. We're dealing with a law that's already been passed. And all we need to do is motivate its enforcement to do all the things that we want to do, and that is to say, to avoid disparity. So those are kind of like the key things to me. I didn't really follow up on that aspect of my dad's, information for many, 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 many years. In fact, it wasn't even until I got involved with AMI that I did. But when I saw that parity was in the draft American Monetary Act that Stephen Zarlenga had prepared, and I saw that parity was in there, I knew that this was serious stuff. And when I saw that his work for calling for the permanent money system, that this was very, very serious stuff. Because a permanent money system is what we don't have. We have that elastic currency thing, goes like this and that, economy goes up and down. But we don't have a permanent money system. Greenbacks are the only permanent aspect of monetary system that's come along since continentals. Okay, so that's where I'm coming from, and that's how it leads me to be here. Finally, when I got involved with Randy Cook and the National Organization for Raw Materials, and we started to talk about it, and I got to realize, what in fact this was. And I realized how important it was in order to effectuate true monetary reform. So with that, I kind of turned my my meetings and my workings towards parity. And I heard a lot of people saying, "Well, that's not monetary reform. Well, that's not monetary reform." Well, I learned everything I know about money from my dad, and he told me it was. Okay, so I'm on a trip. I'm in Elko, Nevada, in a Super 8 motel, and I've been on this trip now since the 15th of September or so. And about the 18th or 19th of September, I stopped in at the Iowa State University archives with the collection of Vincent Rossiter, study more about how parity actually came about. You mentioned Iowa, and you mentioned that Carl was from there, and that really Sioux City, Iowa, was the home of the original Raw Materials National Council. So all this stuff was taking place in the middle of America, and what it was no more, no less, and the community, as big as it was and far-reaching as it was, getting together and saying, you know what, we got to figure out why it doesn't make sense for us to grow all these crops for a year and then turn it over to the commodities exchange to figure out how much we're going to make. And they figured it out, and they figured what they needed was parity. Okay, and parity for all raw materials production. Parity wage along with the other wages in the economy. So with that, my introduction of myself and where I'm coming from and who I am, I want to try to share the screen with my slides. See if I can. Are they? Yeah. Okay. So I'm sorry, I'm not used to this, so I'm going to make sure I see. Okay, so to regulate the value thereof, parity economics. Big, 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 big discussion. For the people who don't think that parity economics is part of monetary reform, just what I'll tell you, that while I was in Iowa, when I was at Iowa State, and I was going through the papers of Mr. Rossiter, three times in those papers, and I was only reading like one box of the folders of the papers, three times I came across this phrase, to regulate the value thereof. How could it not be part of monetary? They, knowing what they know, said regulate the value thereof requires parity. That's what they were saying back then. So I'm glad that we kind of chose the name of the talk today to be to regulate the value thereof. The why, the how, and the when. I'm going to talk about a bunch of things. I'm going to see if let me see if I can get the other view. How do I get the other view? So I don't have to show my slides on the side. I don't know how to do that, but
We're
that's okay.
Seeing them in the middle too, Joe.
I'm sorry?
We are seeing them in the middle. If you want to go slide show, you have to click on slideshow in the top banner.
Oh, okay. I see that. I see that just behind you are screen sharing.
Yeah. And then from beginning and
From beginning?
all on the far left.
Okay, from beginning. Gotcha.
And
Right.
I hope that's what you want.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much, Lucille. But now how do I advance from there?
On the bottom left corner, you should, if you click there, it should advance of the white.
Well, that's the wrong way.
Yeah, well, the next one on the bottom, right there.
That one, no.
That's advance.
Well, folks, now you know how much I know about
You're doing great, Joe.
this. So to take off this huge discussion about monetary reform, when people want to get serious about monetary reform, you better get here. You better get here because this is something, it's already the law of the land. This is something that only requires the enforcement of the law of the land in order for us to have the equity in our society that we need. Right? So this is what I'm saying. Parity. It's a proven yet unknown American economic paradigm. And you work it to reverse the underlying monetary economic causes for societal disparity. That's where we're at. How to begin this critical discussion? With advice from Dr. Hyman Minsky, one of my favorites, and from one of his papers, one of my favorites, if not my favorite, Financial Instability and the Decline of Banking Public Policy Implications. It's a working paper at, I believe, the Economics Institute. And there's the link to it right there. But the advice from Dr. Minsky, and if you can find this in my paper that was made available, for all economic researchers, for economic theorists to advance an outside the box discussion of economics, to begin by telling them where you're coming from. This is me today. I'm going to lay down some stuff to tell everybody where we are coming from. Okay, so what is disparity? Let's see if I can minimize something else. I'm sorry, but it's taken away the right-hand side of my thing. Then move that. Okay, I don't know if that works or not. The rich get richer, and the poor get the picture. Now that verse is from a song that is properly attributed on the paper that I have associated here. If anybody wants to know, people don't recognize it. It's from the song "Different Values." Different Values from Bill Mitchell's reggae dub band from the Pressure Drop in the Alive 2011 album. I always said with Bill Mitchell, I said I don't understand how he could not be a monetary reformer because he gets it. Okay, so disparity in wealth and income distribution, both globally and nationally, is arguably our number one social divide. And unless fixed sooner or later, the resulting dangers that naturally arise from increasing class divisions can fuel the tyranny of the global owning oligarch. What they've done is they've separated us out from the owners and from the owners to the rentiers. Okay, and so the rentiers are the rest of us, the billions and the billions of us, and the millions and the hundreds of millions in this country. But that divide has to manifest itself somehow. It has to manifest itself either in repair or in destruction, quite frankly. Okay, those are the choices that we're going to be facing, and our children are going to be facing, more importantly, and our grandchildren are going to be facing, more importantly. Unless fixed sooner or later, that's where we'll end up. World Economic Forum, either going to be them or us, folks. It's going to be them or us. This modern disparity in wealth and income concentration is both increasing with each passing day and increasing at a faster rate over these modern monetary times of trillion-dollar deficits, correlated public debt increase. So that's how they do it. And that's how we get here. And that's where we are. Axiomatically, I would say, axiomatically, just as my dad warned. The rich get richer and the poor get the picture. Stay with that thought because that's the world that we live in. Unfortunately, as always, our global monetary authorities have thus far failed to either introduce, or I forget what that other word is there, I can't read it, by law or regulation, any new socioeconomic policies to counter the divisive sociological effects of their own central banking monetary paradigm of only using debt for money instead of using money for money, like our nation did with lawful greenbacks. Heard a lot about the debt problem, the debt for money problem in my attachments to this conference. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, maybe exactly the same way. I apologize if so. But this is my aside for those who know how the depth of the disdain that I have for central bank digital currency. I didn't even spell out central bank digital. It went by its local media. CBDC is not socioeconomically driven. So where is CBDC coming from? Following the advice of Dr. Hyman Minsky, where is CBDC coming from? Predominantly supranational, that is to say, it's not national, has no national origin. Okay, it's corporate mostly in nature, and it's not money. Now that's the point that I'm going to get a lot of questions on, but I hope so. Besides, CBDC's origins comes not from political economy, but from big data, tech financiers trying to enrich themselves by grabbing a mill, and monetary reformers should know what a mill is, from the planet's every payment system transaction. Again, just like my dad warned, I promise you, just like my dad warned. Okay. See, nobody else gets to say that. They get to say, well, I read that in an economic textbook somewhere. Now what? What happened? Okay, wait a second. Okay, sorry. Okay. Based money, permanent prosperity interrupted. You can't get there from here. Everybody see what I got here? Where we are is on the left, $33 trillion of debt. If we didn't have debt-based money, we'd be on the right, $33 trillion in equity. What's the difference to the people of the United States of America's well-being? The answer is $66 trillion. It could be $66 trillion better off. The bankers could be $66 trillion lesser off. What would happen then? So I'm going to go through this. Everybody knows this, I think, but I'm doing it for a reason. It generates a question. First, all of our money supply comes from private bank-originated debt contracts. Not that they create money out of thin air. So all money has to be created out of thin air. But they do it with debt contracts. What Stephen said, what Michael Hudson was telling us about how they dealt with solving their problem of supplies, of excess supplies. Those debt contracts provide the borrower with an asset of the loan principal amount. So you got my loan. I got the amount, and then later provides the economy with the wealth created by its spending. And that's the most important thing: is the wealth. When we think about all of parity, is about the wealth. And those debt contracts provide the borrower and the economy with the liability of the total debt service payment. That's in the amortization schedule in the loan document. Now, why is that important? Well, that's important because I think Stephen even mentioned it. It's the debt that's permanent, not the money. The money that we create only lasts the term of the loan. The debt that we create lasts forever. It doesn't go away. It stays belonging to, until it's paid. So that we say the debt contract provides the borrower and the economy with the liability of debt service payment. So that's a problem. That's a problem that people have talked about, which is that number three, the debts are greater than number two, money to repay all debts. It's not money to repay debts. Every loan contract taken out in the American economy has an imbalance of debt and money. And money is the only thing that can pay debt. Okay? That's the problem. So the debt overhang, they call it, sometimes the debt saturation or unpayable debts. So then I say reread number one, because the question becomes, well, what can we do about it? Those debt contracts provide the lender with two assets. One's the loan that builds the money supply, so that's where our money comes in. It doesn't have to be that way, by the way. It doesn't have to be that way at all, but that's where the money comes in. Once the loan itself that builds the money supply, once the receivables that list the bank's debt service income over time. Debt service income. That's what makes the 1% go around. Debt service income and nothing but debt service. All the money in the world is created as a debt. All the debt service payments that are in every loan contract, that's what feeds the 1%, no matter how you do it. And then due to our lack of a permanent money system today, again, unlike greenbacks, each loan payment reduces the assets of the lender and our money supply. Our money supply is diminished. And that requires another loan in order to avoid national economic stagnation. I hope that I get the question about that. Second, the payment reduces the lender's receivable asset, but with an offsetting entry to the addition to interest income gain and all the bars. Interest income being the actual seigniorage of private money creation. Most would say. I would say some would. I wrote some would say, but most would say. So you can see why the rich get richer. And someone, well, why is it all of this? Is it kind of natural things? It's like, if you're going to have free markets, this is where we're going to end up. Yeah. Okay, so then I wrote here, in the meantime, those global monetary authorities again have simply continued their central bankers operating paradigm of debt-based money via fractional reserve banking. They don't, when they start to sit down to what to do about the instability in global financial markets and outcomes, they don't look at the fractional reserve banking system as the cause. I wonder why. Sometimes when I get on their blog, they say, is there somebody in the back room who's working on this problem of creating debt without money to pay the debt? Shouldn't that be against the law? Shouldn't that be the thing that people should suffer from doing? Further untethering our national monetary systems from their fundamental proper role within national economies, the role to distribute the wealth produced by our American economic system. The distributive role overtly requires of the monetary authority, if I may, the regulation of the value thereof, i.e. monetary regulation. And when we get, oh, the government's going to be regulating the value of the money, well, you know what? Ostensibly, the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors and open market committees, et cetera, are always thinking about what's happening to the value of the dollar and always raising interest rates has taken more from the people who have the debts and supposedly in order to do what? To regulate the value of the dollar. But they given up regulating the value of the dollar and instead they just take the money. So here I say, please read physical science novelist, Dr. Frederick Soddy's The Role of Money. To me, it's just one of the most important. Well, like I said, when my dad gave it to me, he told me to read it. I said I would. So we say raw materials income. So this is the thing. Now I've actually talked all this time without talking much about parity. Capitalism's debt saturation construct is the enemy of achieving prosperity for all, which is what parity promises and has been shown to deliver. Resolving America's problem of societally unequal economic outcomes is a chore that can only stand any chance of being achieved for posterity today through novel, interrelated monetary and fiscal economic undertakings. These policy initiatives must be, number one, created anew, number two, institutionally bold, and number three, monetarily sound. Restoring parity, bold, timely, and doable. The goal of a parity economy, then, is bold to an extreme, and indeed today, most needed and timely. It is bold in seeking to provide that rough-hewn sameness to the incomes of our laborers and human-scale wealth creators, all of our laborers and human-scale wealth creators. Those who produce the national income, those who produce the goods that in exchange to derive the national income of, again, our American economic system. And as Stephen pointed out in the title, first at the raw materials level, and thus drive our national income results to their natural, advanced, or I'm going to say increased and more balanced potential. Now I had that asterisk there because I wrote must be created anew. Okay, now how did I do that? Oh, sorry. Yeah, but the thing is that parity is already the law of the land. Parity is already the law of the land. So we don't have to do that part of it. Let's see what I can do here. So it's our turn. We in America are most fortunate today that the truly heavy lifting of this bold and sound undertaking has already been done so uniquely well. In the 20s and 30s, mostly among Middle America's community leaders of then the former Raw Materials National Council. That's who they were then. The American economic system is how many of Parity's original authors, Charles Walters and Carl Wilken, notably, Stephen said, called their vision of a parity-based economy. The pioneering economic pursuits required its citizens. Pioneering economic pursuits required the citizens as activists and advocates to educate the entire nation of their works, literally. and educate they did, without benefit of keystrokes, and without the use of that big bunch of intertubes in the sky, Al Gore's internet thing. It was done through their homegrown kitchen table politics, back when home was located, wherever home was located, that actually succeeded. The Zoom of then, with hugs of welcome. Let's see what happens. Okay, sorry. It's our turn. If parity economics is ever to achieve anything close to an across the economy social equity, it will require first to ensure that the largest raw material sector of our national economy, that of wholesale agricultural production, aka farming, achieves an internal parity-based income level that is in keeping with the factory job taken by that desperate and disparate farmer to make ends meet. This possibility that economically unnecessary debt is eventually supplanted by gross incomes, I think that's gross incomes, and will never again be required in the agricultural sector, will be secured by the rigorous enforcement of a parity pricing regime for our nation's food crops. Such would be the enforcement of the Agricultural Adjustment Act, permanent lawful provisions of parity for crop prices enumerated therein. I'm not exactly sure of that citation, but it's there. This fact alone, that of the already existing law on parity itself, raises our parity economy to doubly the political economic question of the day. Everybody that's railing against using debt for money, if you want to make it less suffering, less egregious, you need to have parity to do it. Especially for those younger folks naturally pondering today's questions of capitalism versus socialism. So what happened to parity, and therefrom, how do we get it back? Why, the how, the who? Know what it is? The why? Ending debt money-based societal disparity permanent. Beginning prosperity unlimited that never ends. It's now or never, folks. It's now or never, folks. How? Just to restore the lawful 1936 Agricultural Adjustment Act, public policy, implementing raw materials economics via income balancing at all levels across all sectors. Who is the rest of us? You, me, and we. I hope I didn't offend any pronouns there. That's it. Thank you very much. I'll take any questions if I have even a minute left.
Could you go back one slide to that one sentence, implementing, that started implementing? Just go backwards one slide.
Okay, just 1 second.
Right there.
That one?
Implementing raw materials economics via income balancing at all levels across all sectors. Can you explain that sentence?
Well, I'll try. I'll try, but I'm hoping that Randy's going to keep that in mind when he goes to speak with.
Let me interrupt and just give a quick word. When questions are being answered, Joe may be answering the questions, especially relative to the slides, but Sue or Randy may be jumping in too, and they should be spotlighted at this time too, if possible.
I mean, you can move on to their presentations. I don't want to delay.
No.
That sentence.
No. Let's go with that sentence, and we're going to stay here with Joe's presentation.
Okay.
It's a panel. Think of it as a panel answering your questions now, Lucille, even if it's focusing on Joe's presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna try like this. I should say by implementing raw materials economics via income balancing. Income balancing. So it's the income balancing question, and that's the one that I said earlier about if we are to have any success with parity, okay, we have to achieve allowing the largest sector, the agricultural sector, okay, to have the same opportunity for income as is in the job that they're going to take if they don't get it and they have to go out and get a job so they can make ends meet. That's the way I originally wrote it. By the way, I wrote more about it in my paper, so I hope that everybody will read the paper that's also attached. I finished my paper and didn't really have time to do my slides, so I had to throw my slides together out of what was in my paper. So income balancing is the outcome. Income balancing is the outcome. That is to say that all raw materials produced are going to have the same opportunity to have the same income, and that's the income. That's the cost of their, doing their production, whatever that is. In agriculture, it's a bunch of crops, and in mining, it's a bunch of mineral resources. And in forestry, it's whatever it is. At the raw materials level, we take stuff out of the ground to create wealth. All wealth comes from the soil. One of the doctrines, if you will, of parity economics. All wealth comes from the soil. So you have to have for the people that are producing at that raw materials level all equal opportunities for income as everybody else across the sector. Not their sectors, but across their sector. So that's what it means. By implementing the raw materials economics that's contained in the law, okay? And now the law is only for the agricultural sector. But it's still the raw materials economics. If you read the book that Stephen had up there earlier, it's in there about specifically about how that's what do I want to call it? It's like a credo of parity, and I hope again that Randy will approve of my explanation. So that's my answer, Lucille.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. But I asked for questions, Stephen. That was my problem.
Very good. I'm going to move Sue over here, and Sue wants to, I think, still. And if Sue raises her hand, I'll be able to see her hand if she wants to talk. So it should be well. Alfonso, if you could move Sue's frame by the parity group here, that would be great. And she can raise her hand, and then I know if she wants to speak to an answer. Okay. We have on board, here we go. Steve Schoen. With the first questions or the first thought to him.
Hi, Joe. It's good to see you again.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for that report. I just had a question. Since the law already exists and it's about implementing the law, where's the problem? Is it lack of enforcement? How do we enforce the law? In other words, how do we make the law effective?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that. Okay, but the thing is that when parity was passed, and parity, first of all, with Carl Wilken, when parity was sold to the Congress, and people need to read what Wilken testified to the Congress to get them to pass this act. Okay, the law was written to achieve 95% of the parity price on the agricultural crops. Okay. So then what happened? Well, that's going against the bankers because the bankers wanted not for them to have income, but the bankers wanted them to have debt. So who's the most powerful lobby in Congress? Now, people might say the military-industrial complex. I say Wall Street. I say finance. I say the bankers in this case, because they see that they're going to lose their ability to get that income from that debt and have it supplanted by income. And the bankers don't make money on farmers getting income. So they kept reducing it, Steve. Okay, Steve, over time, I don't know, Randy knows this history great, but they just kept reducing it until it became meaningless. And so bankers still control the Congress. Even today, imagine that. They still control the Congress. And they did in the previous administration and the previous administration and the previous administration. So they earned therefrom the ability to ignore the law. You can ignore the law unless farmers collectively pick up their tractors and get into Washington and start riding around and telling them we want parity. Maybe that's what it will take. I don't know. But right now, the farmers are not leading this charge. It's the raw materials. It's the raw materials economists. It's the raw materials. It's the National Organization for Raw Materials. So how do you get the Secretary of Agriculture, just to go back to the last iteration of the law, because they kept reducing the percentages, I think by regulation, not by the law, but I think by regulation. They just kept reducing the percent of parity that the farmers could make. So no, somebody has to go in there to the Agriculture Secretary's desk and put something down on there and say, you know, you need to enforce this law or you need to be removed from office. That's really, you know, that to me is where it's at. I love to do that, but so anyway, Stephen, the answer is that it can be done. The problem is that it's not being done. It should be being done. We shouldn't be having this conversation. We should rather be rejoicing in the ability of farmers to stay on their land, okay, and to respect their land and their soil. Instead of like when I was driving out here, I heard this report. When I was in Iowa, it said 58% of all farmland in Iowa is leased land. Meaning what? Meaning the farmer is not growing any crops on it, but the corporations are growing crops on it using what they call CAFO, whatever, you know, using industrial economic agricultural means, putting whatever they want on the soil, taking it from the soil, turning it into a commodity. So we have all kinds of problems that come from this, Steve, and they are readily restorable to equity in the whole social economy.
Thanks so much, Joe.
Fernanda has it in the chat. If you can't get a tractors to Washington, if it's a little far, they're very welcome to come to Chicago for May Day for Monday and go by the Chicago Fed there.
I like that idea. I do like that idea.
Yeah.
Maybe I can research if we need a permit or if we can just drive one through. So
thank you for that.
It's a big ag state, Illinois. We can do it.
Well,
we can make that happen.
All right.
That's actually where the Chicago Mercantile Exchange came from, was farmers dumping corn on the loop.
Wow.
Let's do it again. Although maybe, I don't know, we don't want to waste the corn, but.
Exactly. Well, what's waste?
Well, let's give Nick a go. Nick, are you ready? I'm going to bring you up here.
Here. Yes, I'm unmuted, I believe. Thank you, Joe, for your presentation. I look forward to hearing the other two, our other two guests, Randy and Sue, talk on this subject. I have to apologize because I've written my 3 books and I don't really include parity in it because I've never quite understood the whole intricacies of it. Even though I've heard you people talk on it a little bit, I haven't personally researched it myself, just basically from things that we've gotten at the conferences or whatever. And so I stayed away from the concept. I believe that the concept, the overall concept, is within the books. But I am apologizing to you for when you read the book that I don't have parity in there, and it's just because I don't think I'm qualified to broach the subject myself. But I'm on board with you.
Thank you.
And as an aside, I worked in the Loop for several years as a bartender at the Italian Village restaurant, which is about a block and a half or whatever it is from the heart of the financial district. Yeah.
Nick, how about this idea?
Yes.
If you want to put a little addendum in your book, just so you know, it's it's possible, and these might be the people that could help you work with that.
Well, actually, I probably will, because the book is 3 books. The first book, Money Creation 101, that's out there. It's on Amazon right now. The second book, The History of Money 101, that's coming out within a month or so. And we've already kind of gone over having it formatted and everything and over to make sure we got all the mistakes out, proofread and edited or whatever. And the third book, Spaceship Earth 101, really deals with sustainability and everything. And that's written, but it's being rewritten again. And that's probably where it will go. So thanks for mentioning that, Stephen. That's been my plan to get in there. And hopefully I can learn some more about it. So I'll shut up and let you guys talk.
And on that note, maybe we should be quiet and let's let Sue make her presentation. The timing is we want to stay on track here.
But I want to start the history of par economy by saying this. Recently, I went to a group that was discussing Orwell's book 1984. And what struck me was how the history was taken out in that book. It was controlled. Just like the history of our monetary system was taken out of our education, out of our media, out of our consciousness. The same is true with a par economy history. And it's very important for me that history is known. That's the information where we can think. Okay. So a par economy is the real economy of goods and services. So it's based on natural law and natural rights. It encourages domestic production of material wealth within our nation. It ensures a fair distribution of this material wealth throughout the entire economy. This is a system that is making the whole economy fair for the worker, the owner, and the raw material producers. And here's my little friend who's learning, and he says, why aren't we taught about par economy on our school? And a fair economy requires everyone earning an income that pays their expenses to live a decent life. Okay. The concept of parity. In classical Greece, the philosopher Aristotle spoke of natural law. Laws caused by humans varied from place to place, but what was by nature was the same everywhere. And natural rights were universal and inalienable. They were part of the intrinsic nature of man. Next. The French physiocrats. All wealth comes from the earth. The French physiocrats of the 18th century taught all wealth comes from the earth. As technology increases the efficiency of raw materials usage, trade and commerce are spun off. And Leon McLaren says this very impressively. Cut off from the earth, our industries would stop, our works crumble, and we ourselves starve. And I just want to say at this point, this is what first attracted me to parity. It got me to think. I'm a city girl, right? I don't come from the farm and that whatever. But when I realized that I could look around my world, my room here, and everything that I saw originated with raw materials. And I had never put that together, of course, because it wasn't taught to me. Okay. And Benjamin Franklin traveled to France, where he personally spoke with Pierre Samuel Dupont de Nemours and others of the physiocrats. Next. the American Revolution, natural law and natural rights. In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson writes of natural law, natural rights. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This separation from England birthed a new nation with a history of sovereign money, free of the private bankers. Keep that in mind, of that history of our money up to the revolution. Next. Okay. The most important aspect of a par economy is the production of raw materials and their exchange at the first point of sale at what is called a parity price. This allows the raw material producer, he gets a parity price, he can pay his costs to his merchants, to his industrial suppliers, to his laborers, to the mechanics he needs. These are all his costs. He is getting a price where he can pay for all his costs. That money flows through the entire economy without the necessity of debt. Okay, very important. And of course, the bankers hate that. The parity price ensures that all labor would have a fair wage to lead a good life. Doesn't say everyone has the same exact wage, no, but everybody earns enough income at that price that they can pay their costs. Or if you're a laborer, you earn enough wages so that you can pay for your apartment and your kids going to school, whatever. The parity price ensures that all labor would have a fair wage to lead a good life. It ensures the business owners have a fair profit to invest in their business. And this little boy says, why hasn't this happened? Next. Okay. An economy is a flow of raw materials which are produced, processed, and consumed. Now, this I took to show the raw material flow starting on the farm. And in this country, and in every country, really, if you think about it, everybody has to eat 3 meals a day, or else they don't function. And so, because of that, the products coming from the agricultural sector is the biggest percentage of raw materials. So here's the farm. The farmer's creating wheat, okay? And he is going to sell that to the miller. And the miller is going to take the flour he makes and sell it to the bakery. And the baker is going to create the bread and sell it to the retail store, where people, all of us, are going to buy it, unless we make our own food, grow our own food, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Okay? So that's the flow. Okay. At the same time, money flows in the opposite direction. It passes from hand to hand. The income to one sector is used to pay its costs. So, hold on a second. So the outer flow is the flow of the raw materials being processed and getting to the consumer. And the inner flow is the money going from one part of the economy to the other. Okay, next. Here we go. So from the farmer point of view, he's getting an income because he's getting a parity price, we hope, right? That income he used to pay his costs. Maybe he has to buy a tractor dealer. Next. That tractor dealer, the farmer pays him for the tractor. That's his income. Well, he has to pay his costs to make that tractor, to pay his labor, to pay to help his business, right? So, and again here, the tractor, that's the dealer. The tractor manufacturer is the one who's making it. So he's getting an income from the tractor dealer, and he has to pay his costs for his workers and whatever. Okay. The U.S., okay, the economy is said to be, okay, you can go next. Okay. The U.S. Constitution and the creation of money. In our U.S. Constitution, the power to issue money and ensure its purchasing power was placed in Congress. Congress shall have power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and a foreign coin. A lowercase coin meant the Congress could either mint coin or print paper currency. Both were sovereign money, not a debt. Next. However, from the beginning of the new country, state legislatures chartered private banks. The charter gave the banks the legal privilege to print their own private banknotes and give them to borrowers as a loan, or create the money in an account for the borrowers from the bank. This permitted the creation of bank money alongside government sovereign money. The purchasing power of the money could no longer be controlled by the government. The nation would suffer, but the bankers would reap rewards, interest on the loans, ownership of the collateral if the loans failed. And this little boy is saying, why was this allowed? It's a good question. Got to get the history. There are two economies, the real economy, the financial economy. And here's Frederick Soddy. Unlike wealth, which is subject to the laws of thermodynamics, debts do not rot with old age and are not consumed in the process of living. On the contrary, they grow at so much percent per annum by the well-known mathematical laws of simple and compound interest. So you live in a house, you have to take care of the things in your house. You have to, they wear out, you have to exchange them or get somebody in there to fix them. But that's not what goes on with debt. Debt just grows and grows. Thank you. Okay. Civil War greenbacks and greenback parties. During the Civil War, Lincoln's Congress issued sovereign greenback paper money to pay for war expenses. Lincoln said, I have two great enemies, the Southern Army in front of me and the bankers in the rear. Of the two, the one at my rear is my greatest foe. After the Civil War, third-party political parties called for the government's issuing more paper greenbacks, very much needed since the banks were forcing a half-century of deflation, which resulted in the depressions, major depressions of 1873 and 1893. And the little boy says, so the greenback dollar saved our nation. Next. 1921, after World War I, the farmers were hit with a major depression. Since the U.S. was supplying the Allies food during World War I, farmers were prosperous and were encouraged to expand using bank loans. However, during a non-public meeting of the Federal Reserve Board on May 18, 1920, the board decided to raise interest rates at the same time the food prices to farmers were being reduced by the ending of the war. The result was a depression. And you can see the auctions, example of an auction. Between 1919 and 1921, the price of wheat per bushel fell from $2.16 to $1.03, causing unemployment to rise 1.4% to 11.7%. Next. And this man, George Peake, was a fighter for farm parity. He grew up on an Illinois farm, but chose to go into business. He became a business executive for manufacturers of agricultural machinery and a strong advocate of farm parity prices. He and other farm leaders kept parity alive in the 1920s. They lobbied for the McNary-Hagan Farm Relief Bill in Congress. This bill was the first attempt to raise domestic farm prices by national legislation. The bill gave farmers a parity price based on the 1909-1914 relationship when the entire economy was in balance and prosperous. The bill also created a government corporation to buy surplus commodities for sale overseas. The bill was twice passed by Congress and both times vetoed by President Calvin Coolidge, who called the bill, quote, price fixing. Next. The Great Depression of the 30s saw the price for raw material production plummet. Given the low prices for farm products, why couldn't these starving people afford food? Answer, when you have no money, you cannot buy food. Banks were failing, and with them, people's money disappeared. What is admitted by the Federal Reserve today, but not then, was that the Federal Reserve failed to create the money. Next. Okay. In the 1933 Agricultural Adjustment Act, AAA Act, intended to restore farm purchasing power to 1909-1914, when all sectors of the economy earned their way without debt. It was a balanced economy for everybody. With a parity price for raw materials, money would begin to circulate throughout the entire economy. And we saw that circular flow of the money when the raw materials were produced. But the new AAA agency also took acres out of production. The theory was that restricting production would help raise the commodity price. But this would be true only if there were a farm surplus problem, and there was not. The AAA paid farmers a subsidy not to plant. This restriction of production caused a lack of feed for cattle. So the AAA paid farmers to shoot and bury their cattle so the cattle would not starve to death. But simultaneously, 12 million people were out of work and many starving. And this little boy asked the question, who in the AAA was spreading these theories? My teacher must read Peake's book, Why Quit Our Own? And if you do that, you'll find out what was going on in the administration. In January 36, the Supreme Court decided in U.S. versus Butler that the AAA was unconstitutional for levying a tax on processors to fund the program. The AAA of 1938 replaced the processor tax with financing done by the Commodity Credit Corporation, a wholly owned corporation of the U.S. government. Today, the first two sections of that AAA law are still active in U.S. Code. Section 601, declaring an emergency over agriculture. Section 602, declaring the policy of parity pricing. And here's Jerome Powell going, shh. Today, the Secretary of Agriculture is still obligated to regulate markets at parity because the emergency has not been ended. But don't say anything because we need to issue our debt. Next. People were elected in townships and counties to do the work of counting the acres being retired by the AAA. Carl Wilken, head of Progressive Farmers of Iowa, got one of these jobs. He experienced the restriction of farmers' production, which did not cause price increases, but caused lack of feed for cattle. He watched the farmers shoot and bury their cattle so they would not starve to death, yet people were starving. Wilken said, I decided that I was going to find out just what brought it all about. Next. In 1936, he formed the Raw Materials National Council, an organization seeking funds for research. Why did this happen? The project attracted professionals with experience and skills necessary to find proof of what was going on with the economy. Charles Ray, an engineer, J. Carlson Atkinson, an engineer and president of the American Manganese Association, Dr. John Lee Coulter, professional economist with a long history of college teaching and on the editorial staff of the Journal of the American Statistics Association. Wilken called him my teacher. Next. The researchers did a factual analysis of the economic record of the United States using government statistics kept by federal bureaus. In these records, they found irrefutable evidence that raw materials production is the foundation of the national income, which includes all sectors of the production economy. This raw materials production had to be priced fairly, parity pricing, or the national income would be crippled. Next. The first Congress of Industry and Raw Materials, sponsored by the Raw Materials National Council, was held November 14, 1938, in Sioux City, Iowa. Wilken had researched economic statistics for 2 years and had identified conclusions that flowed logically from the record. Manufacturing, transportation, and other functions of business and capital represent only services that could not be performed at all if the raw materials were not first produced. Next. 1:17 ratio. He found each $1 of gross farm income creates $1 of factory payrolls and $7 of national income or business in the United States, over the entire economy. Next. Next. By 1941, Wilken published his booklet, Prosperity is Within Our Grasp, containing the results of the statistical study of the U.S. economy. A copy of the book was sent to all heads of the 48 state departments of agriculture. And his organization went in and worked with them so they understood it. And then Wilken and the state officials helped educate and convince Congress of the real workings of the economy. After Pearl Harbor, Wilken was constantly in congressional committees talking farm parity. He hammered home, without parity prices for agriculture, production times price would not generate the income necessary to pay for the war. Next. Congress passed legislation 1941 and 42 and raised the loan rate given by the federal government on agricultural production to 90% parity. During the war, all futures markets suspended operation voluntarily because they were no longer needed. This parity price was in effect during the war and for 2 years after the end of war. Carl Wilken. Current economic thinking, dominated by the vastness of our industrial expansion, has apparently forgotten that new wealth in the form of raw materials has been the beginning of the economic cycle since the days of creation. And the little boy says, "My hero." Next. Is that it? That might be the last one.
Looks
Hello?
like
Oh. Is that it?
Yes, Sue, that's all.
Oh, good. Thank you. I'm so glad I was able to do this.
We gotta let's think for a minute together as a group. There's what I'm thinking. Well, we have Randy to present. His piece is important. Randy is flexible, and the time is we have 20 minutes to the hour. What I can suggest is I can give the parity group here 10 more minutes to 3:10. Then if we would take a break for 10 minutes, Sam Hummel would start at 3:20 and Franz Verhagen would start at 5:20. If that's okay with Franz and everyone, we can make that a go, because that's the time we're going to need for Randy and just 2 or 3 questions or something to stay within our time limits. Without objection, or with a good sense of humor, we can try for that perhaps. Randy, I'm going to stop sharing, of course. And Randy, if you can share.
Sure. Yeah, it's okay with me, Stephen. I can even chop my presentation down quite significantly too, if need be.
Well, is there a sense on the group? Is there any way, if I'm particularly it would be crucial for Franz. I don't want to lose Franz or Sam for that 10 minutes if they had to go or something. But let's go ahead and we'll do the best we can. We've been off 5 minutes before, so let's just see what we can do.
Was there a plan for breakout rooms sometime before the end of the entirety?
Yeah, actually, no. Then it would be Sam and Franz, and then it would be the closing and breakout. No breakout rooms. No, there's no breakout rooms until the end now. There's no breakout rooms anymore. We're finished with breakout rooms. Okay. So, Randy, why don't you go ahead?
Am I on screen here?
Yes, you are.
All right. Well, it's welcome. My name is Randy Cook. I'm happy and pleased to follow both Joe Bongiovanni and Sue Peters in trying to expose this information to folks who have probably not heard much about it. It is sort of a hidden history, or at least a missing history in the United States. Although at the time that it was in conversation at the government level, federal government level, it was fairly intense conversation and subject to a lot of participation and policy, what shall we say, sausage making. In fact, it may have been the subject to more sausage making than any other single topic in U.S. policy history. Nonetheless, as Joe has alluded and as Sue has tried to bring us along, regulating the value of money is part of why NORM, that's the National Organization for Raw Materials, that's me and this organization here, became involved with Steven Zarlenga and the AMI back in the 2000s. Chuck Walters and I attended several AMI conferences at the time, trying to share this information. NORM itself was organized around 1970, 68 to 70, as a nonprofit educational organization in Granite Falls, Minnesota, by a man named Arnold Paulson, or was known as Red Paulson because of the color of his hair. And he and Chuck Walters spent quite a bit of time with an old Wallensack tape recorder, sitting in a hospital room interviewing Carl Wilken about this subject matter. And the result of their recordings, Chuck Walters took the recordings and transcribed them, turned them into his book, Unforgiven. If you read through that book, you'll notice the first 5 chapters are, first there's a transcript, and then there is an analysis of the transcript. And so that's how the book began, the Unforgiven book began in 1970. And then around in 2003, I believe, I tried to get a republication of it, second edition going, which I did help to produce. And well, let me see here. Where are we going next? There we go. Chuck Walters is dropped in a little image of him in the upper left-hand corner of the cover of the book. There's Red Paulson, Carl Wilken, John Lee Coulter. John Lee Coulter, by the way, is still the namesake of an economics award given at North Dakota State University to this day, where Coulter, in fact, was the president of the university for quite some time. And then J. Carson Adkerson was a man from Virginia who noticed that there was completely insufficient production of manganese in the United States, given the amount of steel that we produced, and knowing the metallurgy of that process, that manganese is what's known as puts the starch in steel. It's what makes iron become steel, and gives it its strength. So anyway, the Adkerson noticed that we did not produce manganese here in the United States, and couldn't figure out why until he began to dive into that. And so it was through that connection with the folks at the Sioux City, Iowa meetings that they came to be involved in the parity programs and the raw materials component analysis sector. Now, regulating the value of money. You know, I don't know how far back you need to go to be reminded of the fact that false balances, false weights are an abomination to God. And so when the purchasing power of our money fluctuates over time, that is what we are doing to our money. We are making it false. Now, in the private civilian population, that process is called uttering and publishing, and it is considered to be criminal. And if not criminal, it is at least considered treasonous. So here's Henry Carey and Alexander Del Mar, Frederick Soddy, George Peake, and Solomon, by the way. You can go back as far as you want to discover folks who have been trying to tell us that we need to be honest and regular, constancy over time in the purchasing power of our money. It is a requirement for social justice and longevity. Now, what I've got here is this is a graph of the Consumer Price Index from 1800 to 2022. Now, these are, as you can see in the subtitle up here, this is in constant 1947 to $49. So a $47 to $49, that's somewhere right down around in here. Right in there is 1947 to 49. So that's the 100 mark. You can see it's halfway between 0 and 200. And so that little flat spot right there is the 100-cent dollar. And so this is what the consumer price index in our country looks like in terms of a constant 1947 to $49. How are we doing? I see lots of blank stares. Yeah. Well, there's a little hump here. Imagine that at the War of 1812. There's a little hump here at the Civil War. And there's a little hump here in 1920, which is the end of the First World War. And then we wind up with our 1947 to $49 here. And then guess what happens in about 1971? Wowee, look, isn't this a nice ride? Anybody remember what happened in 1971?
Came off the gold standard.
Correct, yes. Nixon closed the gold window for the international gold standard. Yep. Yep. See, we've been off the domestic gold standard since 1934, but the international gold standard was allowed to run until 1971.
And it was a myth all along.
Pardon?
It was sort of a mythical all along.
Oh, absolutely. Sure. Sure. Nonetheless, people did use it for reference.
Right.
You know, even if it's a myth, it's a shared myth.
Right.
And so what I've done here, I've laid in, there were three parity-based periods during the 20th century. And I've laid those in on the top of this. This is the same graph. I just put in these three parity-based periods. This is the 1910 to 14 base period. This is the 1925 to 29 base period. And this is the 1947 to 49 base period. So that just shows where they were along this CPI. And so what I'm going to do, having talked about the purchasing power, regulating the value of the purchasing power of our money as an element of monetary reform, here is what the purchasing power of 1 bushel of wheat looks like when you hold the dollar itself constant. Now, aside from the fact that trying to explain this is probably full of all kinds of conceptual problems, nonetheless, just the sheer fact that it bounces up and down somewhere between $3.75 and about 40 cents. How do you suppose you could plan your business based upon a track record like this? It just makes it completely unpredictable as to whether or not you will be profitable from one season to the next if you are a wheat grower. And this is what we have done. This is why I say the constant purchasing power of the dollar is an important aspect of monetary operation, and it needs to be included as an element of monetary reform. And so this is what brought Chuck Walters and I into the AMI 15, 18 years ago, whenever it was. Anyway, one of the other things I've done here is I have added in some observational information. I've superimposed here actual market year average prices. The red line itself is a constant purchasing power line for wheat, but these black items are what the actual market prices were during these times. And as you can see over here in 2012, the purchasing power of the wheat was about 70 cents, but the actual market price was $7.77. So you see, it doesn't, although $7.77 went into the pocket of the farmer for every bushel he produced, it only paid off 70 cents worth of debt. So it wasn't in particularly good condition. But anyway, the one thing I need to say here about the unit of currency, the inflation and all this stuff, real money has to meet wealth as it is delivered to the service of the community. The unit of currency is all of it. All of it. All wealth not yet purchased, plus that which is in the progress of preparation. I said wealth, all wealth not yet purchased, plus wealth that is in the progress of preparation, plus the current value of the capital assets of the community, divided by the total number of money tokens, is purchasing power per token. You know, wealth is consumed and rots and must be resupplied, maintained, renewed, reinvented. Money, real money, is only a claim on wealth. Wealth. It's the wealth that matters. Sadi's epithet about the nothing that you get for something before you can get anything is apt, because as a chemist, he understood physicality and substance. The goal of our production economy is to provide every citizen with the best products and services. The best. Productive efficiency is the key to a secure prosperity, demonstrating the fallacy of whatever the market will bear. Whatever the market will bear is a fallacy. Variability in the purchasing power of wheat makes planning impossible, making ag producers subject to external economic forces, which means they are subject to finance rather than earnings. Wilken and Ray researched the statistical record of the nation. They observed that as gross earnings, the income, gross earnings of the raw materials sector rose and fell over time. National income rose and fell in ratio to those earnings. That ratio changed slowly over time as the state of the arts of production and technology advanced. They observed that the income of the raw materials production sector always led both prosperity and depression. Charles Ray forecast national income for a decade 6 months in advance of government figures with an accuracy of 98%, in fact, better than that, followed by following the earnings of the raw materials production sector, chiefly agriculture. And that was all published in this particular book here called Prosperity Unlimited. It was published by Carl Wilken in 1947. Now that link there is to our Norm website. It's I have constructed a digital edition of that 1947 publication that you are welcome to download, study, and make use of however you might. Now, as far as the actual measurements that were used, they focused on national income, not on GDP, not on GNP. They focused on national income because it was the production economy, the production of wealth, not the production of finance. Because as they pointed out above, and as Sue Peters pointed out, it is the physicality of it. It is the stuff. It is the raw materials that is the important ingredient. It is the beginning of the economic cycle and has been since the beginning of time. Excuse me. So here are the national income. This was the 1947 to 49 breakdown of national income according to the Kuznets paradigm or analysis. You see the national income here was about $213 billion. So that's the total size of the circle. Wages, salaries, and supplements was about 64.2% of that. Net interest was about 2% of that. And these two items, wages, salary, supplements, and net interest, are what's called here the cost segment of the national income. These other four, corporate profits before taxes, rental incomes to persons, that also includes trademarks and patents, and small business or unincorporated business incomes, and net farm income, make up the revenue segment of the national income. And the total of costs and revenues is national income. So this was how it broke down in the 1947 to 49 parity base period. Now, as of 2022, this is what our national income looks like in the United States. You'll see our cost has gone from 66.2% to 71.7%, while our revenue has dropped from 33.8 to 28.3. So we are not earning at a rate high enough to cover our costs. And if you can see here, the largest reduction of any of the segments has been the net farm, which went from 7.2% to 0.5%. And that's rounded. It's actually somewhat smaller than that. But I didn't want to flatten you with all kinds of zeros and percentages. So that's essentially what the time has done to us. Now, as far as the situation of parity in the law, these are the citations. Title VII, United States Code, Section 601, declares the conditions of the emergency from 1933. That was what was declared. Well, the Butler decision in 1936 people were not sure how much was thrown out, how much of this law of the Agricultural Adjustment Act was declared to be unconstitutional. There were two things essentially that the court said about the Butler decision, and number one was you cannot tax one group of citizens to the benefit of another group of citizens. You cannot tax processors so that you can pay farmers. And I agree with that. I think that is correct. You cannot do that in this country. We don't do things that way here. We're supposed to each be pulling our own weight. The second thing that they said in that Butler decision was that there is no authority in the federal government. Now, it doesn't say the executive, and it doesn't say the Congress, and it doesn't say the courts. It says there is no authority in the federal government to regulate agricultural production. And so there you have it. And so the AAA got thrown out. So the declaration of emergency was ended. The declaration of policy was ended. Butler got decided in 1936, and in 1937, Congress came right back and they said, well, the following provisions of the AAA, not having been intended to regulate the production of agricultural commodities, are hereby reenacted, validated, confirmed, and without change, we will reenact them. Boom, boom, there you are. And so we know, according to the 2015 Supreme Court case called Horn, that's actually the Horn 2 decision. If you read through that decision, you can look it up. It cites Title VII, Section 602 as current law. So we know it's still in there, which means that the emergency continues, that the requirement for the regulation of the markets because of the emergency taking of the marketing rights of the farmers continues. And so here we are. We're still stuck with the inability of our own federal government to do anything but steal all of the output of our agricultural sector and finance it through private means with fake money, and simply pass all of the productive assets into bankruptcy or through bankruptcy at a pace that is not too egregious and doesn't put too many tractors into the streets of Washington, D.C.
How did they justify that? The saying that there's no authority in the federal government to regulate ag production. Did they just assert it or like prove
No,
that?
the Supreme Court said, show me in the Constitution where it says that is a power delegated to the federal government.
Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5
That doesn't talk about agriculture.
talks about regulating the value of money.
Yes, it does. However,
And
it does
what is
not
money?
say anything about agricultural production.
I think it implies it, but that argument would have to be made.
Right. We would have to construct that and then convince them of it.
Yeah.
Now, we know, as far as the parity process goes, that by pricing agricultural output at parity, we can balance the economy and eliminate the need for long-term capital debt.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that that hooks together and makes sense economically.
Mm-hmm.
But it does not say that we have the authority at the federal level to tell farmers what to grow.
Mm-hmm.
Only what we will pay for what is offered for sale.
Very good. That's a clear point, Randy. Are these next three slides, because we're almost at the end of
Yep.
310.
Yep.
I'll make a quick summary.
Let me run through this. Here's Wimpy. Anybody remember Wimpy? I'd gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. The problem with Wimpy is somehow it always gets to be Tuesday. And Norm, we still don't need no stinking economic theories.
They work on real facts and reality. Okay. Lucille got her question in. I'm going to give like a 1-minute summary, sort of like summing up. I want to bring Will Ruddock's thinking into this because Joe has alluded to it and Randy has laid it out. And so I want to make this point, and I'll turn it over for a question or a last comment from somebody. But in the outline that Will made, and I'm going to be back on parity in just a half a second, is he gave us the information. He looked at the indigenous ways, which for us in the 30s would be how does farming, how does life take place? He would do the asset mapping. What is part of the real economy? He would then went through visionary structural tension when he talked about that rubber band and this is finding like the right pricing and looking at the tools and the resources to do it. So I just want to say there's an analogy with a lot of what we're thinking about. And if we're going to, we have to, you can try to throw parity away, but you'll be throwing away life, maybe, perhaps, too, because we've got to be back in some kind of balance where humans are on relative equal terms. So the analogy is that what's going on here with parity is like a modern day summation of Will's suggested, Will Ruddock. So that's parity. Randy's presented his work, and the work of Carl Wilkens in the 30s was much like Will did in Kenya. There's a parallel there. So what'll need to probably happen as we go forward, and we have 50 people here, 51, we need to think about parity, maybe in new terms a little bit, but we're going to have to revisit it, live with it, and think it through to, as you know, Lucio was moved by the parity, Will's talking, but then Will talked about the real procedures of it. And our suggestion in the parity group is you can try to throw away parity, but sometimes something like parity has to come back. And I'll last say the other thoughts on parity have come from Virginia, which were very good. And when we revisit that, we need to take into account the non-farmers, the family, the wife, the husband. We've got to put it all together in a package so we can have parity today. And it may take all 50 of us learning to work together to come up with the parity program for today. And we can revisit the term, and that's okay. So anyhow, I'm going to encourage the parity group to write a letter to Virginia, and we'll have a response, I'm thinking. I think that's something, but I think it's important we come together. Randy said at a meeting, how can we convince others if we're not convincing Virginia too? Because Virginia, she gave her critique, and we need to be able to respect that and answer it well. And that'll be some work for us. But we all need to be thinking about parity based on a whole line of crucial speakers this weekend. So let's prepare to go together hand in hand going forward. That's my suggestion. And we're at 3:11, and I don't see any hands up. So I'm going to say, if a hand goes up now, we're going to be in the break time until 3:20. We've got 9-minute break. And during it, please no music right now. If there's somebody needs to ask a question of Randy or of Joe, of Sue, please stay on right now, and we'll do that. That'll be a break time, but we're going to start at 3:20 with Sam Hummel, and Holbert will be moderating. Any questions now during this break? And if you don't have to hit the bathroom right now or get a drink, if you got a question for these good people, please now give it, or please now raise your hand. Any thoughts?
Thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome. Oh, I see Eric. Eric, you're here. You're back with us. Do you have a...
Yeah, it's good evening. This is almost 4 o'clock in the morning here, Philippine time.
But Eric, let me ask you, did you see this presentation?
I was too late, sorry.
No, then I want to get questions just on the presentation. Later, a little later, we'll open it up, but people here have said specific things and I want to connect to them. Franz,
yes.
Franz has his hands up. We'll come back, Eric. Franz, please go ahead.
Thank you.
Yes, I think what Stephen was proposing for the parity group is very interesting and important. And I think one of the elements they can also include in the tools section, really trying to show people how the statistics of national income has been displaced by GDP, and which basically is abstraction in the financialized society. And so for people to see that all people have to eat, and that the farm sector, though mechanized and everything, is still really the basis of the economy. And particularly, I'm addressing this to Randy, because he came up with this.
Right. Yes, that's...
So how would you try to convince people? How could you convince people and the powers that be that we need statistics on the national productivity economy?
I don't think that's where the fight needs to take place. If we can't recognize that poor nutrition makes it impossible to educate anyone, then we have to first start feeding people good food. Then we can have discussions.
As they say in Latin, primum vivere deinde the inner philosophy, at any rate, first living and then philosophizing. So that's basically what you said. That is what the Romans already said.
Yeah, right. Yes, exactly what Spartacus was told. Yes.
But Randy, can one find statistics on national income?
Well, yes, but what has happened in the statistical collection methodologies over time is that it used to be that in order to calculate GDP, first you had to calculate national income, then you had to add and subtract to come up with gross national product, then you had to add and subtract to come up with gross domestic product. Today, they do it the other way around. They calculate GDP and then massage the numbers with additions and subtractions to work backwards to get gross national product and national income.
Gentlemen, I want to give Adrian a last question here too. Adrian, you had your hand up. Did you lower your hand, or do you have a question, dear?
Well, I was thinking you were sort of starting to talk about what I wanted to ask is if you make parity part of the monetary reform, how do you do it? How do you separate the real economy from the speculative and money buying part? I'm not an economist, but the other part. Mm-hmm. How do you separate Main Street from Wall Street when you make in doing parity? And I think that's kind of what you started to talk about.
Well, sort of, yeah. First thing I need to say about all of that is that what parity does is that it makes the financial manipulations way too obvious, way too easy to keep track of. All of the false purchasing power becomes and so it makes things dangerous or uncomfortable for people whose livelihoods and economic policies are based upon financialization. Because when you begin to pay the proper price for the raw material component of our living standard, and the need for more borrowings is reduced, it becomes way too obvious. So it puts things in an uncomfortable light, let's say. So I guess it turns it into a questionable ethics condition.
Adrian, let's move on. We have 1 minute. Eric, you have your hand up.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Eric.
Mr. Cook, hello. This is Eric from the Philippines. It's interesting that you're talking about parity farming. I'm interested about that. Mm-hmm. But although you're talking about food in America or farm in America, but right. I think still in America is still in the age of plenty in America. But just in any case, for example, as a monetary reformer, we're gonna be advocating dividend debt-free money or supplementary income or like say bailout money for the American. In America, I heard that the United States as well as EU subsidize, for example, their farm, their cows at $2. I heard in EU, for example, cow is subsidized as at $913, and America, the Japan is subsidizing the farm as $2,700 per cow. The American cotton farmers, I think, in general, the United States of America is spending $4 billion a year of subsidies, which is even greater than the value of the cotton itself. So you have the subsidy in United States of America. In the Philippines, it's zero. We don't have here. So why is it not possible for America to provide a family subsidy in the form of unconditional dividend bailout money or universal basic money income for the Americans to have some really a standard of farming that could be sufficient for the American people? But as far as I know, there is plenty in America. There is plenty in America, but if there will be $20,000, $30,000 dividend to every American per annum, so I don't think so. There will be problem in farming in America. So if we will have here in the Philippines, we're gonna be in real subsistence level, and there will be no poverty here in the Philippines. Philippines is a former colony of the United States during the First and the Second World War. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And we'll let Randy respond, and then we need to turn it over to Hobart and Sam Hummel. So thank you.
Yeah, Eric, thanks for the question. It's I guess one of the things I need to observe is that the situation in the Philippines needs to be certainly revised, particularly in the light of Douglas MacArthur's history there versus his history in Japan following their surrender. And the difference in approaches that were used in Japan versus the Philippines. In Japan, they implemented land reform, which I don't know how it was done in the Philippines, if at all. But my guess is it was not done well.
Exactly.
If at all. And that's, MacArthur himself needed to learn a whole lot too. He was instructed as well, but too late for the Philippine benefit, as far as I can tell. But there is no, each nation is going to have its own ratio of income to wealth production or wealth creation. It's going to depend on who is there, who is producing, how much of it is being produced and delivered, and that's up to you as people to make your determinations on that basis. That is your money, your wealth, and your choices. And that it needs to be free of interference from us and all other outside interests, if you ask me. Not that we're unwilling to help, but that, nobody can make those decisions for you. And if they try, they're going to mess you up.
We're going to have to hold it there, and we'll continue, and hopefully we've got more energy after the conference, and we can start planning and working on things. So let's conclude this, and I'm going to turn things over to Hobart, who's going to bring on Sam Hummel and the Money Matrix. So thank you, Joe. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Randy. Wonderful
Thanks,
stuff.
Stephen.
Okay, and take care, all.
Thank you all.
Eric, for your last question, and thank you, Lucille, for helping throughout.
Thank you.